Alright, we've built for the warthogs, we've built for the Red River hogs, and now it's time to build for the final piece of this entire section. We are building today for the emus, one of my favorite birds of Planet Zoo. Now let's get right into it. Alright, so hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of OakWood Zoo. We are cranking out these episodes every 3 days, and I'm trying my best to keep it consistent, because again, eventually I will fall back into one episode a week, but for the time currently, I am doing a pretty good job of building consistent enclosures, and we still have a lot to go. And the main thing I want to do here is that I want to get a really large chunk of this zoo done by the end of the year, because it was originally my plan at 2 years ago or whatever to finish the zoo of that year, which was obviously not happening, and it probably won't happen this year. But I do want to make a substantial amount of work in the zoo, specifically with the South America section, with our new America's pack animals, as well as Africa, and finishing up other loose ends here and there. But anyway, so in today's episode, we build for one of my favorite birds of Planet Zoo that we've recently got. I mean, not really recently. A few years ago, I've gotten the emu. Now this is one that is part of Oceania, and I know that it is going beside the 2 pigs that we did for Africa. So I kind of contemplated doing another African animal, but then again, I really did. I wanted to improve the emu enclosure at the same time as thinking about that. So I just figured we might as well put this in. And I think originally I was honestly thinking of doing the cassowaries here, but I didn't really want to make it too much of a jungle enclosure. And by the time I finished the enclosure, I was like, I don't really want to do cassowaries in here because it doesn't really scream jungle or rainforest. And cassowaries are just kind of if we have both cassowaries and emus, it's not really too realistic. So I decided to go with the emu, and then we could delete. Unfortunately, I know I'm sorry for the people who like this enclosure, but I am going to probably delete the old emu enclosure. It was a bit too small. I am keeping a bunch of the pieces from that enclosure, like the fencing, and I might reuse the moat in some enclosure, but for the most part I will be deleting that, just because I really want to improve a bunch of enclosures, especially also because that was too small for the emus. So this new enclosure is very big. I have found, especially you'll see this in the next episode, that the recent builds I've been doing are either really big or really small, or not really small, but they're either too small or too big. For the Saki enclosure that was last episode, that was a bit too big, because we had I put 4 monkeys in, and it was still ginormous. And then for this enclosure, it is also a bit too big. The next enclosure that you'll see, the next episode next week, is a bit small for what's going to be in there. Our guests next episode, our animals next episode, are absolutely adorable, and they are absolutely my favorite. I've actually gotten the liberty of naming them and everything, so very attached to them. But anyway, yeah, so talking about the actual enclosure here, you'll notice that this is going right beside the Red River hogs and the warthogs. This is honestly my plan from the beginning, to have this huge kind of wing out, because this honestly is the best area so far for crowd congestion, because how this would work is you would go into the penguin house, and then you would come out on the other side, and you would see the penguins outside. You could go to the dead end on that one side with the flying foxes. You could come back, look at the quokkas, and then you have this huge open section of 3 different enclosures right beside each other, of the emu, then the warthogs, and the Red River hogs. So it kind of transitions you into the African section. I know it's not perfect, because realistically I would have 3 African animals there, but we have 2 African and 1 Australian. But I didn't want to put the emus somewhere random. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with that old spot that their enclosure was in, so we'll probably figure something out for there. But I do really like this new enclosure. I think that the main thing, again, you'll notice a lot of the foliage and a lot of the rocks are very similar to the other 2 enclosures right beside here, because it makes sense, because you do have the very similar kind of theming and landscaping, and that's partially why I chose the emu here instead over the cassowary, because the other 2 enclosures were, well, the Red River hog enclosure was a bit more dense, tropical, and then the warthog enclosure was a bit more dry with the mud pits, and then in this enclosure it's kind of a mix of both. You have a few trees around here to give it kind of that tropical feeling, but then again you also have a lot of soil around to give it a bit more muddy, kind of dirty kind of environment. And the thing I also really liked about this that I'm definitely going to use in the future is I've revamped the fences that I used in the last couple episodes, those last enclosures, to make a shorter version of it, and then I connected the shorter version to the larger version. I think this is at the beginning of the episode, the speed build, using I made my own triangle kind of piece to connect them both, and it looks really cool, honestly, because how the enclosure works is it goes underneath. I've sloped the terrain so that way it goes kind of underneath, underneath. Not necessarily a moat, but it is lower terrain near the guests, so they don't, obviously they can't jump over the thing, the concrete. I didn't like how it looked with just like the fence really tall across the entire thing, so I shortened it near the closer to the guests, and then I kind of made like a ramped kind of fence to connect both of them. And it honestly looks pretty cool. I like it. I like the elevation. I like how the terrain goes down, but also the fence now goes down. You'll see, so it looks pretty cool in my opinion. Again, the guest area is pretty much the same as the other two enclosures. I just wanted to keep it very simple, just a plain plant moat or foliage moat with that little chain link fence there. I feel like it should probably be good enough. I know a lot of enclosures usually have two. I think it's a requirement for enclosures to have two safety security, so you have two fences or two, like a fence and a moat. I guess we technically do have that. I don't know if the chain fence is the most secure, but I think it's probably good enough for what it's used for here. The main thing I did really change about this enclosure, and I really tried to step out of my comfort zone, is the shelter, because this is something that I have never done before. It's not really similar to any other shelter I've really done, and I even managed to use pieces that I rarely use on a regular basis. For example, the wall texture of this was made from the aquatic faux wall, I believe. It's like the stained wall set. So I recolored that to be like a darkish brown, and it's not necessarily bad. I like it. I don't use it that often because there's a few better textures to use, or I just prefer. But I think it turned out honestly pretty nice in the end. It blends very well into the like the foliage, and I also made I did have an inspiration photo from here. I'll throw it up now. But yeah, I tried to recreate that. I specifically like the doorway kind of area with that overhanging iron kind of area with like the gray overhang and the canopy kind of, because that looked really cool. And I used one of the older pieces of metal, but then I used the twilight trim, and I did that along like to connect the iron overhang to the wall, and that looks pretty good. I think it blended in pretty nicely, and it looks honestly pretty decent. It was also interesting that I did two staff doorways actually, into the actual enclosure. Normally the way I do it is I have the staff building, and that's where the staff enter, and then you have the gates or whatever, like the pens for the animals, and that's where you would have the staff enter, and then they would go outside from the same place that the animals go outside. But I did that differently today. Again, they could still do that, like they could go through the doorway that the animals go through, but I also gave them two actual doors, like people doors, for them to use as well to get into the enclosure. And the pens were mainly the same. I did add concrete, or I think it was like the mud wall texture underneath, instead of just having dirt, which I think added a really nice contrast to the other two enclosures, just to make them a bit more different and pop. The inside of the shelter is pretty similar to the other ones. Again, I don't have too much variety when it comes to the backstage areas because there really is not a lot you can do. Other than that, the enclosure is decently really close to the other two enclosures, again because I wanted to keep the similarities to not throw the guests off or the audience off. But I just wanted to add that wow factor that is the shelter, which the pigs don't really have. The pigs are very similar in their enclosures because it makes sense that because they're both pigs, you would have both same kind of enclosure and shelter, which I think they do. So yeah, the thing that I really like about this overall is that it ties in the entire section. I already talked about this, but like you'll see in the cinematic shots, I took a lot of shots of the entire section together with like mainly focusing still on the new enclosure, but overall the entire section. And it looks really cool. I cannot wait to do this for the rest of the zoo. We can finish the next section, which I am working on the next section of the zoo. The next thing at the next episode is not that. It's not part of a new section. It's just kind of like a one-off where we just build an enclosure in. It is close to one of the things we've been working on, but it's not connected to anything big. So that's in the area. The episodes following that, or at least the next episode following that, will be something that is starting a new section, a very small section of the zoo, but a decently it's a new section. So I'm very excited about that. My favorite part, honestly, about doing the zoo, outside of actually finishing the zoo completely, because that'll take a while, is doing these little small sections and completing them, because you get to see all the enclosures side by side, and it really looks like an actual zoo. The only thing that would make it feel more like a zoo is if I had guests in here. But I'm not doing that, because it's going to take way too long to get them in, and way too long to get them out. The only way I'm doing that is if it is for, like, a trailer, which I probably won't do for a while. Actually, I might do one for the Americas Pavilion once we finish that. The other thing I wanted to talk about a bit was the plans for the zoo. Now, there are a lot of things going on. We have the new Americas pack animals to build for, and then we've also finished up the Oceania section. I've talked a little bit about like bits of the plan in other episodes, like how we're moving the entrance to the other side of the zoo, as well as deleting some other enclosures, which amazes me, because I remember in like the 2 episodes ago, if you watched the Red River Hog enclosure, one where I talked about like the Chvalsky's horse old enclosure with like the rocks that were weighing down the zoo's piece count, I went back there and I still found like a few more like rocks and stuff, and I still managed to get rid of 4,000 pieces, or like around there. It was ridiculous. And I ended up going back to those enclosures, and I just kind of used the bulldozer tool to get rid of the Chvalsky's horse enclosure completely and the red deer enclosure, just because again they're enclosures I know I can do better. I know the foliage is really nice, but again they were heavily weighing down the piece count, and I just kind of want to do a restart of the enclosures. I do want to build for them again. I just want to redo them. Also because I want to make them blend in a bit more to the actual like zoo. It would be amazing. I actually just thought of this like right on the spot. It'd be amazing if we could move those both, the Chvalsky's horse and the red deer, to the Eurasia boardwalk, because I'm really struggling to come up with animals to put on that boardwalk. I do really like the idea of it because it kind of reminds me of the Asian monorail from the Bronx Zoo. Of course, instead of a monorail, it's a boardwalk. So it would take you on a giant long trail of the section, and you could just go on the single path, and you can see all these different animals. Because I do like how I want to have the zoo very cleared out and mapped out where like guests are supposed to go. I don't want to have it like in any zoo. You wouldn't want to retrace your steps too many times. So by having a boardwalk that kind of like goes around that kind of section all at once, it would be pretty useful. So yeah, that is probably something I'm going to do in a while. Honestly, I'm not prioritizing it too much. We got a lot going on in the Americas and Africa. I'll prioritize currently doing the America's Animal Pack animals. I have plans for the flamingo. I have plans for the ocelot. I don't yet have plans specifically for the rhea, but I have a general idea of what I want it to look like, the enclosure. I just don't know exactly where it's going to go. It's probably going to be a one-off enclosure. The flamingo I've already talked about is going to be part of the America's house, the America's pavilion. The coyote I probably will not build for, just because it's not one that really interests me and I don't really have a spot for it that I want to give it. The bighorn sheep will be going in the North America section. I'm debating if I want to do like an Arizona kind of like subsection of that, where we could do like the bighorn sheep, a couple other desert animals. Maybe we could fit the coyote in there if I really wanted to. But we could put in like the puma. Yeah, I'll think about it and I'll research a bit. But yeah, just things like that will probably be nice to do. Those are things I just want to think about. I went over a bunch of different sections that zoos have, like a Sierra Nevada section, an Arizona section, a jungle trail section. Just kind of piecing together what I want to do personally for the zoo, and I do have my own list of animals I want to add, which I'm very excited for some of them because we never built for a lot of these animals. So I'm very excited about that. Anyway, I think I'm probably running out of time here to talk, so I hope you all enjoyed it. I'm gonna wrap this up. There are cinematic shots at the end, of course, just like always. Hit the subscribe button if you enjoyed this episode, if you're enjoying the series so far, because there's a lot more to come out. We have 2 more enclosure. Actually, no, I shouldn't guarantee that. 1 more enclosure at least next week. Maybe 2, probably 2, honestly. It honestly just comes down to editing for me, because I'm pretty good at like maintaining the building parts of this now. I remember when like at the beginning of the year we were doing like 1 Planet Zeus people a month. That was ridiculous. Now we're doing like 5 episodes a week. But yeah, but next week we'll probably at least have 1. I guarantee we'll have 1. But yeah, anyway, I hope you all enjoy it. I will keep you guys posted on any future updates for this for the zoo. And if you do want to get those future updates and you want to see future episodes, please hit the subscribe button. I know I already said that. I know I'm rambling, but I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye guys. Have a great rest of your day.